Welcome back, guys, to another episode. Currently I'm working my way through all the water blocks I've made in the past. Now I do recommend that before you watch this movie, I'm not sure I'd really call this a movie, a video, you should probably watch the one prior to it, since we're going to be doing a bit of comparative improvements from the previous one. So from the last one, this has been improved significantly. One of the ways I did that was to simply make it bigger. It is longer and wider. For cost savings reason, in the last block I made the water block, the water channels, the total width of that, not that much wider than the TEC itself, narrower being cheaper, less copper. But once you add in the space for all the bolts and the space for the seal, the actual slots for doing the cooling was actually not covering the entire TEC. So I made this block much wider, which meant the slots are definitely covering the entire surface of the TEC. And I made the block longer, which enabled me to move the end tanks further away. And this enabled me to mill the slots deeper at the ends of the block. This is because it's cut with a slitting saw, and a slitting saw is about 60 mil in diameter. Now, when you try and mill up to a wall, you can't get all the way into the corner because of the curvature of the blade. So as I made the block longer, it's able to mill the full depth further. Now, some of you might say, why don't you just not have the end and just mill it the entire length of the block? That's definitely possible, but in reality it didn't work for me. If I just didn't have the surrounding thick block of copper, that would have meant that the base of the copper block would have been incredibly thin. Now that is a big problem, because the block is actually, you need to remember, like 80 mil square, quite large. You've got all these retention screws and the rubber seal, which by design, well, not necessarily by design, but the way it works is you put the seal on the inside and the screws around the outside, and because you're clamping the block outside of the seals, it's actually causing the block to bow. Now as soon as you mill the outside of the block off, then it's really losing a lot of rigidity, and then your copper block is not perfectly flat, and it has to be perfectly flat to go against your perfectly flat TEC. The other thing is that the end of the block is acting as a support for the fin, and that was part of the problem with this block. So this has much thinner slots than the previous block, 0.3 and 0.3 fins. Now I know it's really hard to see in this picture, but the fins get thinner the further away from the ends of the block, because the end of the block is actually supporting the fins. Even though the slot is supposed to be 0.3 the entire length, as it gets to the center of the block, it is much wider than that, and the fin is much thinner because the copper kind of bends into the blade. So in potentially my new block, I'm going to work to resolve that, well, make it better. This also has two covers, and I talk about why I went to two covers in the previous video. But essentially the reason for this is I moved to HDPE from acrylic, because acrylic is actually extremely soft, not rigid at all. Yes, it's brittle, but it's pretty jolly soft when you apply pressure to it, so it would bend. So not very good for ensuring good clamping force so it doesn't leak. So in the previous one I had just one piece of cover plastic where I milled out a pocket or a cup at end tanks, but unfortunately, because plastic is a stress material, it actually caused the HDPE to bow where I'd milled those pockets out, and that was of course very bad if you're trying to then bolt this to the water block, the copper with the fins, and expect it to stay straight. So the simplest way to resolve that was to just drill a perfectly symmetrical piece of HDPE. So there is a hole all the way through, and I do everything on my blocks to make them symmetrical to avoid any kind of bowing. And it's important to me. I need to make the best quality blocks that I can, and so attention to detail. So this does have two parts to the top, making it quite a bit higher than the previous block, but it performs a lot better. And I have a few pictures of it in a computer. She's pretty large, but it's not the end of the world, because all you have to do is insulate the cold plate. You don't need to insulate the water block part of this block. So there we go, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. This was a very good block. I really enjoyed it. Hope to make some more. Thanks, guys. Bye.